All right, welcome back everybody to another live stream tutorial. We are going to continue working on these avocados with focus on creating texture with colored pencils. So if you didn't catch last week's live stream, you can go and watch that on my YouTube channel. And you can also follow along with this project. I have a reference photo and a line drawing for download for free on my website at jhillfineart.com // tutorials. And you can use whatever color pencils you may have available or whatever paper. You don't necessarily have to use what I'm using. I do have a list of the supplies that I'm using on my website, and I can just briefly go over what I'm using today. And I hope that you will follow along with me and learn something new today. So just to recap, I am using a variety of different colored pencils. I have a couple different brands that I am using. I'm using Caran d'Ache Luminance color pencils. I'm also using the Faber-Castell Polychromos, and I'm also using the Derwent Lightfast color pencil sets. Now, any set will work as long as they are wax or oil-based color pencils. I'm not using any watercolor pencils. The method that I'm going to be using does not work well with odorless mineral spirits, which is what I use to blend my pencils. So anyways, I've got my line drawing already on my paper here. I am using Clairefontaine Pastel Matte paper. Any type of paper will be fine as long as it takes a wet media well. So a nice thick cardstock, Bristol board, or watercolor paper will work just fine. I just happen to prefer this kind of paper because it has a very nice toothy and gritty feel where you can add lots and lots of layers to your color pencil piece. So anyways, last week we were basically color blocking the first big large sections of our avocados, and the top avocado here, I actually didn't get to color block this one all the way in, so I did work on it off camera. But if you go back and watch that stream, you can see the technique that I did use, so you can feel confident to repeat those same steps that I used to get to this point. So I wanted to talk a little bit about what we're going to do today because I did color block these areas here, and all I did was use 3 pencils. And what I mean by color blocking is I'm just filling in large areas of color where I can sort of imagine them being separated. If you look at the reference photo that I have right above my head, I also have a printout, and what I do to visualize which sections need to be colored in first, I try to split it into 3 values, 3 areas of light or dark. So to make anything 3-dimensional, you always have to have a light value, a mid-tone value or middle value, and a dark value. So think 3-dimensional, you need 3 values. And I try to break up whatever it is that I'm trying to color into those 3 sections. And then I just find a color pencil. This was my light one, which was the Caran d'Ache. This is a middle green. It's number 713 if you're using that set. And then for my mid-tone, which is sort of a middle medium green, I used this Faber-Castell Pine Green, which is a little bit more of a bluish green. And then for the real dark section, I used this Chromium Oxide Green. Actually, I take that back. I used the Chromium Oxide Green from the Polychromos set for my mid-tone, and then I used the Pine Green for the dark. So all I did was as you can see, I have actually sort of outlined this particular avocado where I could separate it into different values. I'm gonna just imagine away all this detail, all the little bumps and stuff, and just imagine it being a solid color. What is the majority of that color like in this section? It's pretty much a light green color because that's where the highlight's strongest. And then I just found where my darkest darks were, where the shadow was, and I just colored that in. And then what was left over was sort of the middle value, and I ended up with something like this. It's not as separated of values. You can sort of it's good to overlap a little bit, if you're going from a mid-tone green into a dark green or a light green into dark green, just trying to have those soft transitions is what I was going after. And I layered quite a bit, so I usually try to go with these little small tiny circle sort of an application, and I just really take my time really building up those passes of color pencil, because that's what's going to help blend into nice seamless blends. So this is actually ready to blend, so I don't need to layer on any more of that. So I'm going to actually blend that out. That way we can get that drying while we go back to our first avocado, which we were working on previously, and starting on that while the other one's drying. So I'm just going to use a brush. I've got my odorless mineral spirits here. This is a product called Gamsol. It is it's an odorless mineral spirit. It's a solvent. And it's one of the lesser smelly ones. Any one will work. You can get like Michael's brand or Hobby Lobby's brand or anything generic. I wouldn't use anything like turpentine or something from the hardware store. You want something that's specific for crafts and artwork. So, and I bought this new brush today from Hobby Lobby. It's a scrubber, and it's sort of more, I like a firm bristle brush, but I am getting a little tired of my bristle brushes getting a little too beat up. I usually use a synthetic hog hair bristle brush, but this one's really getting damaged, and I just had a hankering for trying something new. So this is what I'm doing. I'm just going to blend this out. So I've got a towel here. I am just dipping in, and I'm blotting off. It doesn't take much of this mineral spirits at all to really get the color pencil to break down and start blending like a paint, which is essentially what we're doing. So I'm going to start in the lightest section, and I'm just kind of moving in small circular motions here. I don't want to overblend because I want to start creating texture. So I'm going to blend a little bit, but I'm also more tapping with the bristles, sort of like a stippling effect. And what that's going to do is, instead of having a continuous motion with consistent pressure, this tapping is just going to soften the pencils slightly, and it's going to leave that texture that I created with the little tiny circles. You can see the patterns of those circles. They sort of remind me of the texture of the avocado itself. Now this one we did completely smooth. We smoothed this out and blended it because it's a smooth textured surface if you look at the reference photo. But the top one is a lot more textured. It's got a lot of those bumps. So I want to start creating that texture early on. It's just going to make it easier for me to do that. It's a little time consuming doing it this way, but if you look in close here, I want you to be able to see all this little texture right here, these little dark areas. That's going to help me create that bumpy texture, because I can enhance that with my color pencils later. Now, if I continuously blend, I can over smooth that and I'll lose that texture. So I'm going to work a little bit smarter instead of harder. So I'll move back out there. Okay. So I'm actually going to switch to a larger brush. This is a larger area, and it's going to take me a little bit longer to do that with this size brush. So I'm going to switch to the same brush. It's still the scrubber. This one is a size 12. And I'm just softening the pencil. I had the pleasure this morning of seeing a work in progress from another art student, and I was very excited to see a work in progress of these avocados. If you are enjoying this project, feel free to share it with me. Feel free to email it to me or send it to me on Facebook if you're part of my Facebook webpage. I love seeing the work that my students do, or people that follow my work. Okay, as you get to the edge here, you do want to be a little careful, because if you have too much of this mineral spirit, it will go outside the lines and it'll bleed. You really don't want to do that at all. I don't want it to spread and become feathery. We do have an irregular edge because of the texture of the avocado, but I'm not there yet. So I don't want to end up creating more work for myself to do later. If you're watching, feel free to ask questions, whether it's related to this project or something else art related. And you want to make sure that when you're going in and out of different sections of different value, if you have an area of light value and you've been blending in an area of darker value, you don't want to bring in any residual color into that section. So you always want to make sure that you clean off your brushes before you move from, before you go to one value to like a lighter value. Going in a little bit's okay, because you do want to get that sort of cross between values, but you want to control where your darks and your lights are. That's really what makes and breaks your picture. And I want to make sure, I'm just going to double check everything. I'm always so nervous about if everything is set up properly, of making sure that my stream's going well. I'll tell you what, I have been like the worst videographer learning how to do all this stuff. I guess they probably have manuals now, but I tend to try to figure things out without reading any directions. And a lot of times it's not a very good idea. Okay. And if you over blend, that's okay. We can just color it back in. Depending on the kind of paper you're using, that's going to allow you so many times to layer. I used to start color pencils a lot with using watercolor paper, which I really enjoyed. It was very nice. But I decided that I really enjoyed working with a lot of layering, using the techniques of just building on top of large shapes and working my way smaller, and just building up different values and different colors. That the watercolor paper really dictated how much I could do that. And so eventually I just grew out of that kind of paper, and I sort of discovered more of the textured papers. Now you can buy sanded paper, which is like sandpaper essentially, but it's made for artwork. that's a little too much. I really enjoy this pastel matte. I've used this for quite a long time now, and you can color lights on top of dark colors with this paper. That's just how wonderful it is. With the watercolor paper, I couldn't do that. So I had to be very strategic about where I was placing my values and what colors I was laying down first. Okay, so we've got that pretty much blended out now. So I'm gonna let that dry and we're gonna continue working on this bottom one. Now, it takes probably about 5 minutes to dry. You always sort of wanna check it with, just by touching it. If it still feels cool to the touch, it means it's not dry yet. You never want to go over a section that you blended out with your solvent with your color pencils until it's completely dry. Otherwise, you're going to end up damaging the paper and damaging the tooth of that paper, so then you will not be able to add more layers. So we're going to let that dry for a minute, and we are going to continue on with this one right here. So let's go ahead and go back to our reference photo. I actually have two references that I'm working from. I have a printout, and then I also have an iPad that has the reference photo on. I like working from the iPad a little bit more because it does have more detail. It's you get better color, where my printer, it's sort of washed out, but I can at least show you where I'm going with this on the printout. So I'm just going to compare what I have and to where I want to go. So I'm looking at my light areas of color and my initial layers of this section. It looks a little thin to me. I can still see a lot of the paper, and there's a hair stuck to my paper. I can see a lot of the paper coming through. I want a better buildup of color pencil on my piece. So I'm going to just reapply everything that I did previously, but at the same time, I'm going to start capturing different colors, different values, and start creating that texture. So I'm going to work in the upper left-hand corner, and we can also fill in where, I guess, where the stem was on the other avocado. So I'm going to be focusing right in this section right there. So we need a few pencils. So as I'm looking, I'm just going to pick out what I see. So I've got a lime green, more of a lighter green, less slimy. I'm just going to get a couple different greens going. And we also have some dark greens. We've got some muted greens. And we also have shadowing going in here as well. So I like to add some gray tones into my shadows. I think that just helps sort of desaturate or de-intensify some of the greens because it is in shadow. And I think we'll use this French Gray 10% from Caran d'Ache. But we also do need a dark green as well because we do have some dark green colors. And I think I will continue using the pine green, which I used for the dark shadows on the upper portion of the avocado. I try to keep a simple palette of colors. I don't need like 50 million of them, but I try to at least keep it consistent. So if I'm using these greens, I try to keep using the same greens throughout the whole piece. That way everything sort of harmonizes together because there's so many different greens I could choose from, but if I use something completely different in one section and something different in another, sometimes it doesn't quite look right. So I'm going to go ahead and mute myself real quick and sharpen my pencil. Hello, Eggs May Break. Good to see you, Elia. What do you mean by the tooth of the paper? The tooth of the paper, the term tooth, all that means is the texture of the paper. So the grit of the paper. So Bristol board, which is a relatively smooth paper, has like no feeling. It just feels very, very smooth. Where this stuff is grainy feeling. It has a I think according to Clairefontaine's website, it's a plant cellulose fiber or something like that they spray onto cardstock, and it just gives it a very consistent grain texture. It's smoother than sandpaper, but I don't know, it's unlike any kind of paper I've ever felt. But it's just, I love the paper. I could talk forever about this paper. And it is archival and acid free, so it's not going to yellow over time, and it will hopefully last without deteriorating for years and years and years to come. Or at least that's what I'm told per manufacturer's website. Okay, so I've got some darker greens in there. We also have sort of this layering effect. There's like almost rings around the avocado. If you look closely, there's like different, like rings on a tree. We have different rings of greens just on this outer edge of the avocado. And on my reference photo, I see some more of this sort of lime green. So I'm just going to add that in. How long does it usually take for you to figure out what colors to use? Or does it come easier to you after so much practice? Good question. Let's see, let me think about the first one. Definitely practice, and I would say the longer you observe something, the more you get familiar with that particular object. So in the case of doing art in general, being able to, let me backtrack. Color theory. It really pays to know color theory when you are trying to capture color. And also really understanding and getting to know your chosen medium, whether that's paint or pencil, colored pencil, and knowing how to manipulate that medium to get different values, different textures, different techniques on how to get it to do different things. So with colored pencil, I always start with what I call the local color, which you've probably heard me say before in other videos, but the local color is my starting point. And that is, what color is the object? It's a green avocado. That's my local color. It is green. Now, there's very varying degrees of green in this avocado. So I have to sort of deduce what color greens, are in this given section. And I always divide, I try to work large to small. So we've sort of brought in 3 basic greens in different values to start with, but now I'm going to sort of hone in my observation skills and just work smaller. So working up in this upper left-hand corner and comparing it with the reference photo, and having a reference photo really is key, in my opinion, when you're doing realistic artwork, because you have to really know what it is you're trying to achieve, getting those shadows right, getting those colors right. You need to be able to see them. You can't just imagine them, or at least I can't imagine them, because I don't know what they look like unless I can see it. So hopefully that helps answer the question. But yes, a lot of practice and really a lot of fundamental work. I've found that with some of my students that I teach, most of them have been beginners, but some of them have done artwork, for a long time and just wanted to sort of, revisit different topics to kind of brush up on things. And it all really comes down to fundamentals. You know, how strong are your skills in basic shapes or color theory? Because all those really is what makes up your artwork. And then you can get into, you know, warm and cool colors, complementary colors, and how all those color relationships work together to create a realistic color. So a lot of times when I'm choosing colors, I ask myself questions. So in this case, this corner right here, as I'm looking and comparing to my reference photo, and I'll just kind of zoom in on that so you can see what I'm talking about. And let me know if the lighting is okay. I need stronger lighting in my studio, but we will make it work. So this corner right here is a little dark. It needs to be a lot lighter. So if you compare it side by side, it needs to be a lot lighter where it's darker, and it needs to be more yellow. And all I'm doing is just comparing the two. So I ask myself, you know, if I don't like a certain part of my picture, what's wrong with it? Is it too light or too dark? Is it a certain color, you know, is it too green or is it too yellow? In this case, it's too dark and it's too green. So I need to go back the other way, bring it back to this yellow green, and I need to raise the value to a lighter value. So how do I do that? Now, this is the one thing I love about this paper, because you can go back up the value scale, where if I was doing this on watercolor paper, I would have a lot harder of a time doing that, because depending on the watercolor paper, I may not have enough tooth of the paper to hang on to more color pencil. So I'm going to go over this section with a white pencil. Now this isn't just any white pencil. This is a Derwent Drawing Chinese white, which is a very opaque white. It's one of the better whites that I've used in comparison with the other ones that I have. And this really helps me bring that value back up. Now, I realize that this is not a light yellow, because yellow and oranges and like some greens, especially in colored pencils, they're very translucent. If you were to add just a light yellow on top of that dark green that we had, it wouldn't show up because it's too translucent of a color. It's a very weak color, and I need that opacity to really bring out that color. So watch what happens when I put this yellow on top of that opaque white that I just laid down. Now I'm starting to get the color that I needed. And that you would have only known by practicing with your color pencils, to kind of, at least that's how I figured it out, was just by using the medium, using my chosen medium to figure that out. And that helps kind of fix a lot of mistakes too. So I'm okay with that right there. I'm gonna leave it alone for now. I'm happy with where that is. I'm gonna get out some brown, and I'm gonna start filling in this guy right here, this little stem bit. So he's got a little ring of dark brown. And there's this sort of a little dark spot right here. And then the other portions around it almost kind of look, it's a warm color, not quite red, not quite orange. I would say it's like a yellowy, orangey brown color. So I tend to choose my colors based off brief descriptions like that. And I just go through my binder of pencils and I try to find something that's close. Now, I've got a ton of colored pencils. You don't necessarily have to have a million of them like I do. I just have a art collecting problem. but I always try to just swatch it on the side of just some scratch paper and just see if that is close to what I'm trying to get at. So I'm gonna mute myself real quick, sharpen this pencil. I'm okay with that color. I think it's a good base color, so I'm just going to fill that in. And go back to the brown. Now I'm like really zooming in to kind of see how the texture is. And if you look really close, this is the one thing I like about having like a computer screen to work from, or a tablet or something that you can really zoom in. And it really helps to have a high quality photo because you can zoom in and get this kind of detail. And that's going to help me look at the texture, and if there's a directional pattern to that texture. And you just sort of copy it the best you can. And it just looks like sort of a jumbled little scratchy mess. Now, this brown is getting a little bit too dark. I'm gonna overlap some of that brown with this lighter, warmer brown color that I picked out. And now that I have those two colors down, I'm now starting to see some more yellow tones come through. So I'm going to find maybe like a yellow ochre color. It's still a little too dark, so what I can do is use that trick with the white pencil again. I'm going to give this a sharpen. So to bring up those areas where I need a lighter value, I'm just going to put some white down first, and I'm actually going to switch this out to a lighter yellow. I try to think of this as like a little miniature abstract painting. You know, if I can suggest texture and suggest a general shape, usually the human imagination will just kind of help fill in the blanks. And if it doesn't look perfect, that's okay. As long as it's close, we're going for close. And so I just pulled out a little bit of a darker, this is a very interesting color. It's called burnt ochre. It's got a little bit more red tones in it. I'm gonna go back to that brown. I do like to have a lot of colors available to me because I don't really like mixing colors with color pencils. I find, you know, I prefer mixing colors when I'm painting, but when I'm mixing colors with color pencil, it's a little bit more difficult because they don't quite blend like paint does. So I always say the more colors you can get, the merrier, but you can 100% do some incredible artwork with just a very small set of pencils. So as long as you have a good understanding of color theory and you can combine colors to create your goal color, you know, you really don't need a lot of colors. All right, so now I'm just blending that in. I'm gonna let that dry. And let's go back down to this portion of the avocado. Now that I've got that filled in, I've noticed that there is some highlights right underneath where that stem is. So I mistakenly put some shadow there. I'm just going to pop that back out with this white pencil. And then I'm going to go over that with my lime green so I can get the correct color. And that's good for now. Okay, so now going further down, I'm looking at the texture of the avocado. You can see that it's got some linear lines and just some little lines and dots and squiggles, you know, in various places. So as I'm building up again, I'm going to start adding some of those little details in. So I'm going to take this yellow ochre. This one is yellow ochre from Caran d'Ache. Do a quick swatch test, make sure that looks okay. And I'm just going to follow along with my reference and just hand draw where that line lives. I don't want one continuous line. I want it to be a little bit of a broken line. That way it makes it look a little bit more natural. And I'm going to stop it about there. And it's got a couple more. I don't want to overdo it. It's really easy to get happy with the texture. This one's really interesting. There's some texture right here. And it almost kind of looks very spongy. And all I'm doing is sort of wiggling my pencil in just like a linear up and down, but very like very broken lines, but I'm also keeping a nice light hand pressure too. I'm just trying to suggest that texture. But I am paying attention to where it stops and starts. Okay, so I think that's okay for adding that little bit there. So I'm going to continue around on the underside here. I see some yellowy tints. I'm just going to add that along there. Usually when I put one color down that catches my eye, I then start to see other colors that I didn't see before, and that helps give me some clues as to what I'm missing. So since I put that yellow down here, I'm seeing more gray tones in there, very, very subtle, maybe like bluish grays. So I'm actually going to use this, the middle, I don't even know what this word is. It's a Swiss company. I can't pronounce half their colors. Give me 1 second and sharpen. It's not exactly gray, but it does have more of a muted color, and it is a little bit bluer, blue-green in color. And I think it's going to give me just the right amount of tonal shift that I need for what I'm seeing. It's a little dark, but I'm just going to roll with it. And I'm just going to go right on top of it with a cream yellow. And that will help sort of lighten the value just enough to where I think those two combined will get me the color that I was originally trying to go for. And I'm going to add the same color. Nope. I think over here needs to be a little bit more aqua. I do tend to bounce around a little bit. I try to stay in one section as I'm working. Let's see, that is way too blue. I think I want more of like a mint color, I think, is that That's probably going to be okay. So I'm just looking and seeing what colors I have available to me. I don't have a lot of pastel colors. That is one of the harder things to do when you are getting, okay, so it's a little bit more green. Sometimes when you're shopping for colors that are light fast, and what I mean by that is the pigments are light fast and it's going to last up to 100 years without fading if the company has done their testing properly. Some colors you just can't get light fast that I'm aware of. And I've noticed that some of these pastel-y colors, you know, you can't quite get a pigment that's going to last that long. So we just mix colors the best we can. So I just put down a little bit of light malachite green from Caran d'Ache, and I'm just going to go right on top of that with my opaque white, my Chinese white. And that's going to give me just enough of that blue cast. Now I'm going to go back in with my green, and I'm just going to overlap that green onto that light blue that I just made. So colored pencils by nature are a semi-translucent medium. You're always going to be able to sort of see through it anyway. So that's why I really enjoyed working with layers, because if you can create layers and just stack them on top of each other, they all tend to work together in making some really cool effects. And it's always different with every piece. You know, I try to follow the same recipe by color blocking and then looking at values and just sandwiching smooth layers of color pencil on top of texture, but it's always different every time. And let's see, I'm going to go back to my yellow where that little bit of texture was. And I can see along that line that we drew previously, there are some little hints of yellow that sort of comes out from that line. Okay, now I'm going to go back to my pine green because I'm starting to kind of lose my bumpy outer shell or the skin. I'm just going to go in and kind of create some thicker areas where it looks a little bit more bumpy. And I'm just following along with my reference photo. So anywhere my eyes are, that's where my pencil is. I'm always constantly looking at my reference photo to make sure what I'm trying to do is where I'm currently at. And I'm only looking for this dark green color. It's got a really interesting texture on the side. I'm going to reference back to my iPad here. So if we zoom in, we see almost like these, see if I can get that to stay. The bumpy texture is not solid green. It looks like there is some reflective light happening, which is sort of breaking up, you know, those outside edges. A lot like this is, you can see where light is bouncing all around because it's being broken up. It's diffused from the bumpy surface. So I don't know that I want a continuous green line. I might have a few random lines here. I'm going to zoom in so you can see what I'm doing. So we started off with the solid line here, and I just sort of did a little bit of a staggered, broken line, just so I could leave these areas of white. And I can fill that in with a different color later to kind of give the illusion of some reflected light happening along that line. Okay, so I'm just gonna work in this section right here. So what other colors am I seeing along here that we can capture? I'm just adjusting my light here. That's quite dark. Give me 1 second. I'm going to try and brighten this up so you can see it a little better. If it'll let me. Hold on 1 second. Let's see. Nope, it's not gonna let me do it. I'll have to figure out how to do that. I don't think my camera will let me do that while I'm recording. Ah, there we go. There. Hopefully now you can see that a little bit better. I apologize of how dark that was. Okay, back to what we were doing. Get out of my setup screen. Okay, so we've got our little broken line here, and we're gonna go back up to this section here. Now, this is dry now, so we can maybe start adding in some of these little scratchy pieces. Let me get my reference out. You can kind of see that there's lighter values here, more orangey tones. This is quite dark compared to this, so I need to lighten that up quite a bit. So I'm gonna go back to my white again, and I'm just going to draw in areas where it has light value. Now I know this is white, but it's still gonna be letting some of that undertone, those layers underneath, to go through. It's an opaque pencil, but it's not going to be white again ever. You know, it's still a semi-translucent kind of application. It's just more opaque than others. And I'm just looking at the random little dots and dashes until I get something that looks relatively close. Now I'm going to go ahead and, since this needs to be more orange, I'm going to take straight orange onto this. And I'm just going to layer that right on top of my white. See how that just bumps the value up? And let's see what other colors might be in there. I even see some nice, really deep oranges, sort of like right in here as it goes into, it looks like maybe there's a hole or something. Let's get that dark back in there. That's not quite dark enough. I'm gonna use a indigo. This is a dark indigo. I like using dark blues for shadows or areas that are really dark. just adding a little bit more of this kind of a burnt rusty color. This one is terracotta. And I don't want this everywhere, just in the areas that I see this color. And I'm just kind of taking some educated guesses, really. Trial and error. It doesn't have to be perfect, just getting it somewhere relatively close. And I can see like there's little pits and, you know, dark spots. And I'm just going to reinforce this dark area because it's quite dark. Okay, I think it needs some more. This terracotta wasn't as red as I wanted it to, so I'm going to go and find just a straight red pencil. Just to add in some of that red that I'm seeing. Anytime you're making texture, it's usually just a repetitive series of lines or dots, squiggles, some sort of little, of a little shape that just repeats itself. That's all texture is. And you can capture most textures by learning how to manipulate those particular shapes. So in this one, I'm just using little dots and little lines and kind of making my hand just kind of jiggle a little bit. So maybe that's a little bit too much red, but we can just put a little bit more of this terracotta on there. And I'm going to go back to the opaque white and try and bring out some of those lighter areas. It's very easy to overdo the texture. But trust the process. Keep working it, keep layering. Eventually it's going to kind of pull itself together. I'm going to go back to the brown. Add a little bit more here. And if it seems too textury, like the texture's too sharp, just take your odorless mineral spirits, very, very, very little, and just dab at it. Just enough to where it softens the areas that you think are too textured. You still want to stay with the same rules of making sure your dark stay in the dark areas and your light stay in the light areas. You don't want to be wiping areas of color to places they don't belong. So after that's dry, I'll probably make one more pass and kind of bring out some more texture and maybe add in a little bit more yellow, just adjust some colors. So I'm just going to leave that for the moment. And once you zoom out too, it starts to pull together. So it looks really weird when you're close up to it, but once you pull away from it, it does look more like what you're trying to achieve. So I'm going to zoom back in, and we're going to keep working in this upper left-hand corner here. So I'm going to bring out, this one is a champagne color. I'm just going to overlap everything that I did up in this corner here. I want to give it almost like a glaze of this sort of white color. And this is just going to help smooth a little bit and also reinforce this light value. It's not quite white. It definitely still has some color. And I don't want to leave the paper showing, so I'm just overlapping with the same color essentially. And I'm going right on top of this texture that I've already added in. Small little circles. And not a lot of hand pressure. You want to have a light hand. Now I think I'm going to add more white on this side. White is sort of a cooler tone, and this area does feel like it's a little bit cooler in color. It's got more cool greens or bluish greens. It's like a mixture between some lime greens, but they're more cool toned. And there's one thing that I'm seeing too, right along this whole skin, there is a continuous line of where the flesh meets the skin of, or the innards. So I'm gonna sharpen this real quick. This is the Polychromos, oh, I can't read this, permanent green. Now when I'm doing lines or anywhere that needs to be really sharp, I use the Polychromos because it's an oil-based lead in the pencil itself, and it's going to give me a really nice fine line, and the tip of the pencil is going to be firmer and it's going to stay sharp longer than a wax-based pencil. So I love these pencils to get various details, especially when they're fine details like this. Now I am being careful not to go over where we had previously put some of that yellow ochre. I don't want to lose that. And I am going to go back into those areas where I see that yellow ochre because I see some other little doodads. It's probably a little too warm of a color. I'm going to go with this yellow ochre. This one is the, raw sienna. And I'm just going to enhance where those areas of yellow ochre are. Like here's one here. I'm just going to mix in a little bit of this raw sienna with that. And I'm going to go back to that permanent green. And there are a few little kind of bits of texture. You can almost see in, like if you're looking at a piece of avocado, it does have like some lines. So you could even make some little veins or, you know, I'm not really sure, some sort of fiber that's within it. And just take a very light hand and just sort of suggest that type of texture. Don't really see it much down here, but I saw more of it up here. So I'm just gonna kind of play with that. And I am going to bring out some gray. I'm gonna switch this gray out. This one's a warm gray, #1 from Faber-Castell, and I'm going to put a little bit of gray up here. It's still a light value, but this gray is going to de-intensify some of those strong green. I found that that really helps in creating realistic colors is when you're adding gray, when you're controlling the intensity of a color or the chroma of a color, that really, really helps create a sense of realism. Because anytime we're observing from life, when we see a color, very rarely do we see that color in its strongest form. It's usually diluted a little bit with something else, whether that's a gray tone or a complement, or light travels with all sorts of different colors. So depending on what it's sitting next to is going to influence what color that is, what the object is, what's the color of the light source itself. Is the sun out? Is it yellow? Is this, possibilities are endless. But that's why I always try to urge people to learn color theory fundamentals, because if you can understand color theory and also do some research on lighting and how light works and how color works with light, when color or when light travels, how does that manipulate the way we see color? That I find is very helpful when I'm trying to create realistic colors. Because if you can memorize the different properties, or I guess rules, it makes it a lot easier to pick colors as well. So I'm seeing a little bit of brown in there. I'm going to get my brown. This is probably a little bit too brown, but I can dull that out a little bit with some gray. Let's see here. I'm not going to use the light gray because that was too light. I'm going to go with a dark gray if I can find one handy. Here is a warm gray number 4 from the Polychromos line. And let's see, what else can we add in this section before we do any more blending? I see a few more little areas of texture. So I'm just going to pop those in. Now I want to kind of look at this side here where we have the skin. Now, because those gaps are there, it's it's reflecting light and it's coming off the plate in the background. The plate in the reference photo is white with some, looks like metallic flecks of gold or bronze. We don't see enough of that side to really see if that is going to have an effect, but the light that we see in here being reflected is pretty light. So I'm just going to go with, I'm just going to keep it simple, and maybe I'll go back to, I'm going to go back to this light mint color. This is the middle green, number 713. I don't want a lot of this because I know that this color is a little bit deeper than I want it to be, but I'm going to put white on top of it because I like this color. I don't think I have a lighter version of this color. So I'm just going to put a little bit in those areas where it's white. And I'm going to go on top. Now, I have a couple different whites. This is the Polychromos white. It's very translucent. I don't like it that much, but it does have that really firm lead. So I am using it, but I'm okay with the transparency of it. I don't want too opaque of a white, like if I was using the Chinese white pencil. I think this one's going to give me just enough white to tint that greenish color that I put down to kind of create that reflective light that I'm looking for. Okay, so I'm going to go back to the pine green and just reinforce some of those areas where it needs to be a little bit darker. I always end up going back and forth between my values or my color. I'm always constantly adjusting my picture from start to finish. And that goes across all mediums. So if I'm like drawing with pencils, you know, I'm constantly erasing or adjusting my values or putting down more pencil or erasing or painting over something. That's just the process. You know, as far as for as long as I've been an artist, I have always done that. You know, you just keep working it and figure it out. And honestly, that's kind of the fun part, you know. It's like a puzzle. At least to me, it's a puzzle, an enjoyable one. It's very therapeutic. But don't ever let that stop you and make you feel like you're doing something wrong, because you're not. Because every single artist that I know, we all do the same thing. And we just eventually, you know, learn and improve, and you know, it gets easier the longer you do it, or the more you do it too. Okay, I think I am happy with how that looks for the moment. It looks a little fuzzy to me, which we don't have too many layers. We also haven't blended that section. So you can leave it the way it is. I think that looks fine, but I tend to be an overthinker with my color pencils, so I'm gonna blend it. But I'm going to use a very, very small brush so I can get into all these little nooks and crannies. And I need to be very careful about how much odorless mineral spirits I have on my brush. So starting from the light section, working into the dark. This is why doing realism takes forever, or at least it takes me forever. I'm gonna wipe off my brush, go back into that highlight right there. I'm gonna go into this highlight. It's a very, very tedious and very slow medium if you prefer to color in this way. But I love the challenge of trying to capture something. I always learn something new. Hi, Holly. Do you only draw from photos and real life, or do you also draw from imagination? I typically draw from life and photos. I draw more from reference photos. And I apologize if I got to your question really late. I was really chattering on to myself. But I usually draw from a reference photo because that gives me the most amount of detail to capture, so I can really see what I'm trying to do. But I'm trying to be better about doing imagination. I'm going to be honest, I'm not very good at drawing from imagination. For some reason, I just don't have that creative side or that creative eye to come up with something, you know, weird and surreal. But if I've studied something long enough, I can draw something from memory, if that makes sense. So these last couple of weeks, I have been studying how to draw cats, and I have been trying to memorize how a cat is constructed, as far as like their skeletal structure, and not really like with all the bones, but just a simplified stick figure that is anatomically correct, so I can know, where my little simple lines need to go if I'm putting it in this position or that position. And that I can more comfortably do from imagination because I've studied it for a little bit. So I think the more you study something, then the easier drawing from imagination will be. But I don't know if you're familiar with James Gurney's work. I was watching one of his videos, and he mentioned that he kept two sketchbooks. One sketchbook had drawings from life, or I don't know if he uses references, probably, but whatever he would see, he would draw. And then he had another sketchbook that was completely from imagination. So if he just thought of something, he wasn't thinking about accuracy. He was just thinking about creativity and, just more or less having fun. And he said that the more he did both of those and strengthened both of those skills, the more he could really combine them together, when he would go to create other artworks. And the two would really help reinforce the other. So I really need to do that because I don't really create from imagination as much as I should. I have that fear of the blank page, and it's always sort of stopped me from just doodling because I'm always scared it's going to turn out awful. And I'm working on that. But that is such a great piece of advice that I really want to put into practice one day. Maybe one day when I grow up. But I prefer to draw from life or from a reference, especially since I like to do more realistic, try to capture things accurately, or at least lately. I hope that helped. Do you have a particular bit of side of art that you like to do? Are you a painter or a drawer yourself? All right, I'm going to go back to that dark indigo, and I'm going to start going back in and reinforcing some of those darker tones right here. I think I've lost a little bit of that. A little bit more of a reddish brown back here, a little bit more red. I've been really trying to branch out and start learning new things that I'm not familiar with. The cats was definitely one of them. I don't do a lot of animal art, but I think I would like to get better at that. All right, I'm going back in with the opaque white. Gonna bump up some of these values. I'm going to show you a little trick here. So if you are running out of the tooth of the paper, or this particular white is not showing up as much as it should or could, doing what I'm not supposed to do, I'm actually taking the tip of this white pencil and I put it in the solvent to kind of actually melt the tip of the pencil, and it kind of turns into a little bit of a paste. And that helps me get a little bit extra down. I wouldn't do that though unless you're sort of close to being done with that particular section, because you are putting a hard implement on damp paper, which can help ruin the tooth of that paper. So I'm gonna let that dry once again. Okay, so we've kind of gone over this whole section roughly a second time. I do see I see just kind of like little wisps of some gray tones where it's not fully a creamy yellow like I have it. So I'm just gonna give it a light little coat of some gray just to de-intensify that. And I also see a lot of sort of white marks in this section here. So I'm just going to add in some bits of white here. It's almost like there's cracks in the avocado flesh where it's breaking. So I'm actually going to bring out that gray and just add a little bit of some gray tones along where I drew those, along where I drew the yellow ochre lines, because it's going like inside the avocado, so it's sort of in, not much light's getting in there, so there is going to be a little bit of a shadow. I'm just trying to suggest this texture the best I can. Okay, so I'm gonna go back to my large. No, I'm gonna use the medium brush. This is a medium Taklon scrubber. And it's pretty damp still. I'm actually not going to dip it into my mineral spirits because I don't want a lot. The more layers of color pencil that you have on your drawing, the less mineral spirits you want to use. And the reason for that is because it's going to remove pencil because the solvent breaks down the binder. So you don't want to remove the layers that you worked so hard to put in. You just want to soften them. So very, very little needs to come onto the bristles. I'm still sticking with just sort of that stippling technique, just patting it. And I probably have a little too much of that mineral spirits on here still. You can tell that by just the way the light is reflecting. If it's really, really glossy and you're getting a lot of movement from the pigment that you don't want, you have too much. So just simply wipe it off on a towel and keep going. Oh, hi Laura Lee. Holly is a pseudonym. I tried acrylic painting and watercolors, but I found I was too detailed and overworked my pieces. I never had a freedom of flow that I was hoping for. Gosh, watercolors is so difficult to use. At least I can't use them either. I'm too much of a control freak, I think. And every time I've tried watercolors, they're way too loose, you know, and it just, like you said, I just end up overworking it. So I'm right there with you. What about your acrylic painting? That one's kind of challenging too because it dries so fast. I quit using acrylics a while ago and I switched to alkyd oils, which I find is a lot easier to use. You can check those out. I do have a video on using alkyd paint or alkyd oil. It's not quite traditional oil. It is a, I guess a special kind of oil or oil paint. It has alkyd medium, which is a drying agent. So you get several hours of working time, but then it's dry the next day. So it's almost like acrylic and oil paint had a baby. I think that's a little bit more user-friendly. So you might try that, because you can work that to death, and if you don't like it, you can wipe it off. All right, so I just cleaned my brush, and I'm going into this area where it's just mostly that yellow and white. I don't want any green in this section, so I want to be very careful about not dragging any of that green hue over. And I'm just sort of melting all those little lines that I put in right into those layers. Okay, so we've pretty much just worked this little section, and I'm okay with that. So when it's dry, we'll just continue to build on this. A lot of times, it's very easy to call something finished too soon. You really want to spend time working these layers and just repeating steps, adding more color, adding more texture, adding more, blending, adding more value, adjusting your values. That's what's really going to help create that realism. And it's very easy to think that it's done, but just spend an extra hour on it and it's going to look even better. Usually when I'm doing, fully finished color pencil pieces, I do several layers, many hours. I'm hoping that, I can get something really good done with this project over the next few Tuesdays. And I want to just kind of really show you all exactly how many layers it really kind of takes to do this kind of work. So hang in there with me and keep following along. It is a lot of work. I know we spent the last hour and a half only in this little section, but that's what it takes. That's why you get some really good books or music and just put your headphones on and just listen away. So I'm still not really liking what I've done up here. So I'm just going to keep layering, keep adding more of the white, keep adding value. I think I need to adjust my dark too. There is a product that I might actually get out and use, because I'm trying to get a little bit of a brighter value in that little spot. It's called Brush and Pencil, and usually I have some sitting right here, but I don't. But if you go to brushandpencil.com, they have this little puck called Titanium Touch-Up Powder, and it comes with like a little jar, and you sort of use the liquid that's in the jar with the powder to create a paste, and you can paint it onto your color pencil piece to bring back bright white. I don't use it very often, but some people will use it for like cat whiskers or the highlights in somebody's eye. And it is specifically made for color pencil, and it is archival. So it's not going to like flake off or yellow over time. So it's made specifically for color pencil. And in a pinch, when I need it for, fixing something, it works great. I love it. But I don't use it often. Okay, so I'm going to leave that. I'm going to get out. This is Nightshade. It's a really dark purpley blue. I'm just going to add that to kind of deepen my shadows. I'm going to sharpen this pencil tip too. I'm going to mute myself for just a second. So you switch to photography and photoshopping. That, I admire people that can do that. I've tried to teach myself how to edit. and it's challenging. It's really a lot of work. It's really an art in itself. It really is. I used to have the Photoshop, but I know you have to have a subscription to use the program, the Adobe program, if I remember correctly. I don't like paying for subscriptions, you know. I just feel like I pay for a subscription to watch TV or listen to music or do this or do that. And I really just, like, one more subscription for a program that I'm not very good at using, like, wasn't really cost effective for me. And I found another program, because there's a lot of ones that are like free or, you know, ones that you can just pay a one-time fee. So that's what I did. I just kind of did some research on different programs, and I found one called Affinity Photo, and they also have, Affinity is the name of the brand, and they have Affinity Photo, Affinity Designer, which is for like vector art, and then they have Affinity Publisher, which would be like the Adobe Publisher, which I use that all the time. And it was a one-time payment of, like, I think I spent $120 or something for all three, and I have it for forever, and I don't have to pay a subscription to use it. So that to me was definitely worth the money, especially for someone who does not really use Photoshop that well. But as far as I can tell, I can do everything that I want to do. So if I need to edit a photo, I can certainly do that. You know, I think it's set up a lot like the Photoshop or, you know, whatever other brands of photo editing. I definitely think Adobe has a lot more to offer because they've got tons of just different programs, but this one works for me. I like it. You should check it out. It's simple, easy to use. So what kind of photography do you enjoy taking? Wildlife or scenery or portraits? I'm just going back in with this orange to pop out some of these highlights again, right on top of the area where I added the white. I'm liking this a little bit better. And I'm going to find a black. Let's see. Is this my black? Dark indigo? Nope. Here we go. Here's black. I'm just going to add a little bit of black here. And I'm just going to soften just a little bit. Okay, let's see. So we went ahead and we already blended that out. So I'm just going to work some more back in here because that's pretty dry now. So we were using the yellow ochre. I'm going to get a little bit of a lighter yellow. We'll use, let's try this one. This one's a more of an orange leaning yellow. It's called Light Flesh 10%. That's quite a name. And I'm going to use there's definitely some gray in there. I don't want the ones that I've got. This one's too light, that one's too dark. I think I'm actually going to use a little bit of, here's Dark Flesh 5%. Same color as this one, just a little bit deeper. So maybe we'll keep that handy. Still looking for something for the shadows. I think I'm going to use this. It's a violet gray. or actually this is sepia, but once you actually color it out, it has a little bit more of a violet undertone. I'm going to zoom back out here and zoom back in. You can see this right here. It's a little bit more of a violet gray. I don't know if you can see on your screen, but violet and yellow are complementary colors, so I think that will go quite well together. I'm going to zoom in a little bit here. As you can see, Lauralee, I am still figuring out how to use a camera myself. Okay, so I'm going to go in with this Dark Flesh 5%. I'm going to sharpen this real quick. It's important to always keep a sharp pencil, because if you have a toothy paper, you want that lead to kind of get in the dips and the valleys of the paper. That way you can get a nice application. So I'm following areas where I see it's real dark, and they just kind of look like little splotches of texture or lines, ridges. They're very irregular looking, and you can actually see that right along this whole section of the avocado seed. It's quite dark. Darker than that, but that just kind of gives me an idea of what's going to be happening there after I put it in. I don't want to overdo it with this particular color. And I'm following along where I had put my previous lines, because you can still, even though we blended it out, you can still see sort of a ghostly, you know, residual bit of it. So you can still see the texture that you had previously put in. Just got to look at it close. Now I know this is probably way too dark, but once I add in the other two colors and sort of blend this again, I think it's going to look pretty good. Okay. I'm going to go with my next value, which is, or my next color. This is the Raw Sienna again. And I'm going to start back to where I started already. And I'm going to overlap where I put that other color. And I'm kind of getting I'm trying to be a little sloppy. You know, I don't want this color, you know, exactly right on top, but like sort of just working alongside it. So you have a little bit of one color overlapping the other, but in different ratios. Just little dots, little lines. Don't overthink it. And just put it where you see that color. So I'm going to go with my next lightest value, dog hair. This one's more of that orangey yellow that I had saw before. I don't think I'm actually going to use this one. This one kind of, it's not really doing anything for me. We'll just put that one aside. I am going to bring out the white again, because I definitely see some bright areas of white or light yellow, very, very extremely light yellow. might even overlap some of these areas of color, just to kind of soften them out. I used to blend a lot of my colors using a white color pencil, which works pretty good, you know, but it lightens everything. But once I found that odorless mineral spirit technique, you know, that was really the game changer there. And I'm just going to continue to add some more white. Oh, sorry, my camera is out of focus there a little bit. Okay. And just, it's important to just take your time. Take your time and just build up the layers. It's very tempting to press down harder with your hand pressure. Don't give in to that. I still do on occasion, and I just have to keep myself from putting too much hand pressure down. You want to keep the integrity of the tooth of the paper so you can add more layers. And I'm going to add in some more of those little yellow spots that I saw earlier. Just kind of reinforce those where I think they live. I try to look where I previously had put the texture and just try to reinforce those as I continuously sandwich them in between different layers of pencil. But trust the process. It all comes together. And there's even some white lines up here as well. Okay, I'm going to go in with that gray violet, just very, very gently in the areas where I see it's really dark. I'm going to bring out some bright yellow as well, because there are some areas where I see some more pops of sort of that canary yellow kind of color. This one is light cadmium yellow in the Faber-Castell. I don't want to overdo this, just in areas where I see it. And you know what? I'm going to bring that brown out. Actually, I want a different brown. This particular brown is kind of warm. It's like a chocolate brown. It says it's sepia, but I don't know why I keep seeing it as a chocolate brown. I have another sepia from a different company, which I think, if I can find it, I think it's from, yeah, here it is. The Faber-Castell sepia. It's a little bit more cooler, a cooler brown, more of like a blue leaning brown. Or a grayish brown. I like it a little bit better. So I'm going to use that to put in that real dark line here. And it's not a straight line. It looks like there's a little bit of an irregular shape to it. There we go. So let me go ahead and grab my little blender brush again. There's a little bit of residue still on it. I can tell because it's making my finger glossy. So there's still a little bit left on here. I don't want a lot. I'm just smoothing, just softening. Mostly scenery and nature and pictures of people as part of the scenery, not identifiable. Also structures or old farm equipment, which that catch my eye for interesting shapes or a ghostly scene. I love that. I love those types of pictures also. I like painting those kinds of work, 'cause I love still life. So anything that is that stays still, I'll pretty much paint it. But yeah, oh gosh, if you get some really good ones, if you ever have good reference photos, I would definitely love to paint one. I got I was part of a plein air painting group last summer. Or no, it was earlier this year. Maybe it was early spring this year. And it was part of the Broadfield Hofwool Plantation group, one of our historical sites here in Georgia. And they invited a bunch of painters, that wanted to come and paint on the grounds. And they had old buildings and, old farm equipment and all sorts of stuff. And, it was just such a beautiful area to go paint in, because you have all these old oak trees and the Spanish moss. And there was a good probably 30 or 40 of us that came out to come and paint as part of this little, I don't know, paint-a-thon or whatever. I think it was like a fundraiser. But anyways, it was a lot of fun. And I'm not much of a scenery painter, so I found this old lantern hanging up in the old barn. And I loved it. It was this really brilliant blue, but it was completely covered in dirt and grime, and it was just so interesting. So that's what I chose to paint, and everybody else was like, painting the scenery and the buildings and stuff. But yeah, I love stuff like that. Okay, so where was I? I don't want to completely get rid of my white, so I'm just very gently softening where I put that white. I don't want to get rid of those little lines either. Okay, so I'm happy with how we have come along so far in this upper corner where we were working. I'm okay with what it looks like. I'm still not happy with my little, what do you call that piece? The little stump where it was attached to a little branch. I'm not happy with it. I think what I'm gonna do is next time I'll bring out the odorless, or not the, oh my gosh, I can't think about words right now. The touch-up texture, and I'll show you how I use that, because I think I really need to reinforce some of those little highlights. I went too dark too quick, and so now I just got to figure out how to fix that. But it can be done. So we'll do that next time. It is about 8:43, so I think I'm at a pretty good place to stop. So what I think I'm going to do as far as my homework, because I don't want to leave this, I think what I'll do is work on this part of the avocado. I'm going to leave out this part. That's part of the tree nut, the avocado seed, whatever you call it, because there's a lot of texture going on there, and I don't want you to miss out on drawing that portion. So I'm just going to finish the outer ring where it is green, and there's a little bit of that texture. I'm going to use the same colors. I'm going to use the same technique by just adding small little lines and also kind of capturing that outside ring of the dark flesh or the skin of the avocado. And I'm going to do the exact same technique in this area as I did over here. So that's the only thing that I'm going to do for my homework and get that finished by the time I see you. So I'll be back here continuing this next Tuesday, same time, 7 p.m. and that is the 25th of July. And let's see. Oh, I love that. I've got a library of photos. Just tell me what you need. Oh, wonderful. Shoot, anything. I'm always looking for good reference material. So anyways, thank you so much for joining me. And if you have any questions or you get stuck while you're working on this on your own time, feel free to reach out to me. My email address is jhillfineart@gmail.com. I also do private one-on-one coaching and local workshops and art lessons. So if you are in Southern Georgia, reach out to me for private lessons. I also can do private lessons virtually as well. It'd be much like this, just one-on-one talking while I'm showing you, or if you have a camera, you can show me your work as you're working. So those are all options. So anyways, thanks for watching, and I will see y'all next week. Have a great night.